Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Alligator podcast. My name is Caitlyn Schiffer. If you don't already know me, I'm the Alligator's podcast host, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're doing a table talk, so I will let my reporters introduce themselves before we get into anything. So, Kat, you can start.
Hi, my name is Kat Tran. I'm the current City and County Commission reporter for the Fall 2023 Metro Desk. I'm from Daytona Beach, Florida, and my favorite artists are Lana Del Rey, The Weeknd, and Deftones.
Hi, my name is Jared Teitel. I'm a reporter for The Avenue, the Alligator's Arts and Culture section. This is my second semester on The Avenue. I'm from West Palm Beach in South Florida. And a fun fact about myself is that I was an extra in a movie, Critical Thinking, starring John Leguizamo. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Sophia Bailey. I'm a second-year journalism major, and I'm the state politics reporter for our Enterprise Desk. We do a lot more long-term projects and stories. I love traveling. I went with the journalism school on a study abroad trip to Italy this summer, and I have an interest in becoming an international correspondent one day.
And I'm Topher Adams. I'm the assistant sports editor at the Alligator. I've been doing Alligator sports for 4 semesters now, covered football, baseball, basketball, a couple other sports, and excited to join this talk and discuss a little bit of interesting stuff today.
So, today we're really going to dive down deep and talk about the importance of mental health, especially in the journalism world, how it affects journalists, and how it also affects the people whose stories we tell. So, mental health, I think it's an issue that, I think we all experience something relating to it. We know someone who has dealt with some sort of mental health issue, and especially in the world of journalism, it impacts us in such a great and profound way. We meet so many people who have gone through so much and, sharing their experiences and listening to them, it could also be a great toll on your own mental health. So I guess my first question to you all is, as reporters and as people in the journalism field, how do you deal with mental health?
So I think one of the things that makes journalism an interesting field, especially as student journalists, is that we don't really have like a 9 to 5 job. We don't really have a structure of like, oh, you're working on something from this time to this time. So it's like, you can get a text from an editor at 10 o'clock at night, or you wake up and there's breaking news that you have to hop on. So like for me, it's like I try to implement like certain habits into my daily routine. So, like, I run every morning and I try to make sure I eat 3 square meals a day and, get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. But I do think that journalists struggle with that. I've even talked to, career journalists who are, working that 9 to 5 job now where it's like even they say, yeah, I leave the office at 6 o'clock, but I'm still in my head thinking about the stories that I'm working on. So I think that balance is really difficult. So I think for me, like kind of as a student, I'm trying to develop those healthy habits of making time for myself before, I kind of become too burnt out because I love journalism. I don't want to reach a point where I start to hate it because I'm burnt out. So,
And I'll say, I've working in sports journalism, we don't deal with this. We don't usually, I should say, deal with the same kind of heavy subjects as some other beats and stuff. But that particular element of the constant grind, especially when you're covering a sport like football, which is its own 24-hour news cycle to itself, it can be really stressful and overwhelming at times. I can remember when I first started on the football beat last year, there were times when I felt like I was just glued to my phone. I had like hundreds of Twitter notifications. I had all these people like I had to be plugged into because you never know when you need to, break some news or write a brief or whatever. So I think that's something to struggle to adjust to, is trying to find any semblance of work-life balance when it feels like your work is 24/7. And I know all of you guys and whatever beat or whatever branch of journalism you do, that's something that's very, very universal, I think, in journalism, and one of kind of the biggest mental health hurdles in this field.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys. I think the interesting is we can only give our perspective, as student journalists. Being a real life journalist, time is much more demanding. So there's only so much that is expected to us, but this is our time to like really prepare for that. And I think UF really does a good job with that, with like the resources we're provided and the news outlets that were offered here on campus. But at the same time, another point I wanted to bring up was like, as journalists, we put ourselves in the line of fire almost every time we publish something. I mean, I just saw a thing on uh, a a thing on Twitter today that was about, sorry, but that was about a woman reporter who was shot and killed during an interview, like almost 10 years ago now, I think, in the UK. And so we put ourselves in the line of fire every day we go to work, and we really just have to tell her, like separate ourselves from our work because it's easy to take things personally. I know, like, I've gotten feedback that, like, from my audience that, like, wanted me to change something about my work, whether it's through email or whatever. That so it you really have to, like, instill within yourself, remind yourself that, like, you're more than your work, and you have to remind, like, your readers too, like, that you're more than the words on the page, and that you need to separate the two because there can really be dangerous impacts because of that.
So, going off of what everyone said, and mainly the fact that, being a student journalist, you don't really have a structured and organized way work setting. Um, and that's why for me, it's really important to stay on top and stay organized and specifically carve out time for myself, carve out personal time for yourself, a specific moment where you can get away from the hectic and daily stresses of, work life as a student journalist. And I've always seen it, kind of being a hamster on a wheel and always constantly running on that wheel forever. And then multiple times, of course, as a student myself, I've kind of gone off of that wheel, and I've have had a hard time punishing myself for getting off of that wheel and not, grinding every day. But I've come to realize that, think of myself as that little hamster. I need that free time to roam around in the grass, prance a little in the sand. And once I am able to, get back to the natural and just ups and downs of life, I can prepare myself for another day of grinding on that wheel. But yeah, that's how I've always seen it.
And I think that's really important, trying to balance that and stay on top of things while still giving grace. I know um, when I first started in kind of student reporting, trying to find a balance between class and work and, reporting classes, which is kind of work and class in one, it can be a lot. It can really be a lot, and you lose time for yourself. And I think if you're not really on top of it, and I'm sure this goes for professional journalists as well, when you're working all the time, you're working tight hours, you need to find a way to keep yourself mentally locked in. Because I don't know how many of you have mentioned burnout yet, but like that's a huge thing to worry about. There's a point last year I was cooked. I thought I was ready to leave here. I love the Alligator, and I mentioned I've been here 4 semesters. Last fall, I was done. I was not going to come back. I didn't apply for the spring. I ended up only coming back because a friend Kyle, who's a sports editor, like literally called me and said, "Hey, we need another person to do women's basketball," and that's the only reason I'm back, and it's the only reason I'm here in the fall. Um, Burnout's a really difficult thing to deal with, and I think finding ways, like you mentioned, to give yourself grace and let yourself like unwind and find moments for yourself is really, really important.
Yeah, I think as journalists, we put ourselves in a very vulnerable position. We're not being forced into this profession. I think, this can go for a lot of us. I don't know what your parents wanted you to do when you were older, but I don't know if they expected you to be student journalists. But, your words that you put on paper, they're a little piece of your heart. So you really mean what you say, and it can take a toll on your mental health if something doesn't go right, if your audience has a negative reaction to something that you said. So, this is a very sensitive field, and it's important to give yourself some leniency and to allow yourself to breathe and to have some time to yourself because you don't want the burnout. And I think we've all had moments where we have been a little burnt out because of all of the work that we have in our hands, and, we take on a very responsible role in our society. So I think with that, and how you also have to be sensitive to your audience, as reporters, how do you approach stories on mental health?
To be honest, I don't really approach it any differently than I do my other stories. I go into each interview not really know, like not pretending, because I'm not pretending, but I not knowing anything about their story or the subject I'm reporting on. And so that's what you got to do. You have to ask the most, really, the start out with the most vague questions possible, and then let them just tell their story. Let them be the speaker. Don't take over the conversation. You got to let them tell their story as it unfolds. And so that'll really do wonders in terms of approaching your story in a non-biased or assumptive way. You never want to be assumptive in your questioning or anything like that. So just go into it really just not knowing anything, because you really don't until you hear their story. So.
Yeah, I think well earlier you made a good point that sometimes we get backlash and people will kind of respond to stories that we've written with some negativity, but with any story, including stories that we've written for this edition on mental health, we're not telling our stories, we're telling other people's stories. So I think in the sense of interviewing people and keeping yourself out of it is really important. I think sometimes with mental health related stories it's difficult because sometimes you're interviewing sources who have gone through experiences that are similar to your own. So kind of sitting there and treating them respectfully and equally as you would with any other source for a different story can be difficult. But kind of branching off of that, I think that when you're, discussing difficult topics, you mentioned kind of starting off with like vague questions and kind of moving into the more difficult topics. I think like for this issue, for this edition, this story, and previous, issues and editions that we've worked on that have discussed mental health related topics, I think I try to preface, interviews when I sit down and kind of built a connection with the source, and I make sure they understand like I'm going to be asking, some difficult, personal questions, but take the time that you need. If people get emotional, just give them the space to kind of, breathe and, let them have the time to get it off their chest. Because I don't feel like these stories can be rushed and these interviews need to be handled. These interviews need to be handled with a certain level of delicacy. So.
Yeah, I think going off of that, I actually, and one of my professors in our lectures this year was like, I guess when you're doing a very heavy story and, it could have some impact on you, whether their circumstances are, but, you have to get through the story, allow this person to tell their story, share it for them, and then allow yourself to react and feel all of the emotions that you would as someone who is hearing such an emotional or whatever you are reporting on. You have to kind of like bottle it up and then let it go once you're done with all your work, because it can really impact your work performance while you're actually doing the story. I mean, to get emotional while, while someone else is getting emotional, I'm sure that you don't really work that efficiently. So
So, as any individual and just obviously as a student journalist, it's important to be accountable and be transparent. And as we have all said, giving the space that people need. I think being able to, if you are talking about a sensitive topic as mental health, it's important to understand when you might be in a position where you have, maybe crossed a boundary or may have slightly miscommunicated and just went off of someone's boundaries. It's important to be accountable and just be honest and be like and just say that hey, I'm sorry, I apologize, and just talk about how you may have fallen short of their needs. And also I feel like having to understand the preferences that preferences that people may have had when it comes to talking about mental health, because sometimes some people may not like being it categorized as challenges or struggles, as it can be seen as a hindrance, and they might want to preface it with a different term that can replace calling it challenges and maybe calling it struggles and whatnot. And just being able to understand your audience and understand the person that you're interviewing, their the fact that this issue is such a sensitive and easily but yeah, the fact that this is such a sensitive topic, it's important to be accountable and transparent.
Something I don't know if we've really hit on yet. So I think like kind of the theme, the thesis, if you will, of our special mental health edition this semester is kind of like challenging the stigma and kind of doing more to promote mental health awareness. And I think as reporters working on that story, I think it's important for us to be informed and knowledgeable on mental health issues to kind of add that context and add that layer of kind of breaking the stigma through knowledge and through learning. I think that's an important element. And then just to be empathetic, I think is really important with sources, because you've all mentioned, like, we're telling their story. We're not telling our story. We're not, we're giving them the space to tell these difficult, challenging stories, to be open and vulnerable about some of the darkest moments in their lives, potentially, in some of these stories. So I think having kind of an empathetic point of view and being open and understanding to these different challenges that we can't fully understand, or trying to understand what they're coming from, and portray that in an honest way, and then balancing that with our own understanding of mental health issues, and trying to create kind of a fair and honest portrayal of mental health and mental health resources and mental health issues, because I think that's kind of what we're trying to do with the special edition. I think that's really important for journalists, and really just for society at large, to better understand mental health, because while it has become more of a understood and more of a talked about topic in the last couple of years, I think we're still kind of in the infancy of really understanding just how widespread mental health is and how important it is for all of us. And I think trying to accept that understanding and being empathetic to tell these stories is a really key part of that as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because you touched on the word empathy and the importance of being empathetic, and I've talked about this a lot in certain like essay questions and like discussions about like career inspiration and interests, is that I think what makes I think the most important, if I were to pick like one character trait for journalism that's most important, it would be empathy, because you're constantly telling stories that you have zero relation or connection or prior experience with. And I think with mental health, especially when you're interviewing people about subjects you know nothing about, it requires a lot of research and opening your mind. And I went into this edition thinking that I'm very like aware of like what's going on in the world and like different things happening, but at the end of the day, it's like you're never gonna fully understand someone's experience, but you can try your best to really like dive deep into the issue, to understand it. So I think that mentioning empathy is really important.
Yeah, and I think with mental health, it's really important for journalists like us to destigmatize the stigmatisms that people have of how they perceive people who have issues regarding mental health. A lot of people like to paint a picture of how they think someone who has mental health issues is, and in reality, it's really not what they look like. I mean, there could be a perfectly fine looking person on the street, and they can be dealing with so much. So, well, we all, a lesson to keep in mind, we all have to keep an open mind. And I think what you were saying about empathy before is that I think my three things when I interview subjects is empathy, accountability, and transparency. Those are my big three, and you really have to keep those in mind whenever interacting with anyone, whether it be for a story or just meeting someone in a grocery store. Those are my big three. And I think going off of this conversation, as journalists who, if you have if you are impacted by mental health, or someone who is impacted by mental health, when you're interviewing a subject, how would you approach a story differently based on your own experience with this topic?
So, I know that coming in, one thing that surprised me about doing this topic and this mental health wrap up for this semester was the fact that people were so eager to talk about their mental health struggles, and they were so grateful and so appreciative, and they were just so open and expressive about that appreciation and gratitude for being able to be given a space to talk about these mental health issues, because as we've all talked about, the stigmatization of mental health and just the importance of bringing awareness to this affected community and any affected individual is very important. And I feel like personally that stigmatization is still very apparent, but I do remember, in my reporting, talking to these individuals, that there is kind of an acknowledgement that it is getting better, and in comparison to past generations, past decades. And I really think that this generation, or just the future, which is presently right now, we have the opportunity to completely change how the media and just how we perceive mental health struggles and challenges.
I think the one point I'll make is that, and I think this may have been briefly kind of brought up earlier, is that when you're interviewing someone about a specific topic, you want to make sure that you're not making them feel like their entire personality and identity is tied to that topic. So like for instance, the story I worked on for this edition was about the state of mental health for transgender and non-binary students here at UF. And it was difficult because when I was talking to them, a lot of the points they made was, professors treat me like I'm only known as the non-binary student. And it was difficult because then my follow-up question was about them being non-binary. So it was like, I see them as a complete person with so many interests and hobbies and personality traits. So I didn't want to make them feel like I was just, adding to that, feeling of, being known for only that one trait. But at the same time, I think that, like you mentioned, they understood and they were like expressive about their experiences. So they understood that for the purpose of the story, that was kind of the main thing that we were talking about. But also just kind of weaving in like an understanding of like, I know that you're a complete person that isn't just tied to the one thing that we're talking about, I think is important for sources to understand.
Yeah, you honestly took the words right out of my mouth. They are so much more than what we came to talk to them about. And honestly, I'm going to put myself on blast a little bit, but I don't go into any interview with like a written list of questions or anything like that because I fully expect to just have a conversation with them and just let it go as it may, and like wherever it goes, it goes. And honestly, 70% of my conversations don't even, they're just they end up going in just like different directions than what they were originally supposed to be, and then I'm able to create new stories out of that. And um which is such like a unique and treasuring experience for journalists because you learn so much about people in the process when you think you already know so much about it, which is why, research is important and all of these things. But as much as you research, you never really know fully until you go to speak to the source at hand. So I think it's really important to treat your sources as if they're so much more than what you came to talk to them about, because they are, and there's so much that you may not be able to uncover. Have you ha excuse me ha, had you just stick to the topic that you were assigned. So it's important to branch out.
So actually, I do the same thing, which is I don't want to put myself on blast too because I'm talking to local government officials, but just being able to talk to your interview, just being able to talk to them as an individual, that they're just another human. Like I love going into an interview with the intention of having a real, genuine, and honest conversation because they're just like me and they were once the same age as I was, in the same position, the same student, whatever major they were at one point. And one of my favorite words is multifaceted. And as we've all talked about, the different blends and of identities that we have here on campus and in the world, we are all multifaceted individuals with multifaceted identities, multiple identities of different things that we identify and assign to, and what our likes and dislikes are. And it's just very important to take that into account when you're talking to people because like I said, they are just like us. These people, these sources, they're not just sources. They're not just, oh, I need to get one more person to speak so I can write about this story. They're people and their words matter. And it's just very important to be able to put their words into something that they can reflect and we can all reflect on and read about and just enjoy.
Two things that we need to keep into account are comfortability and relatability. When we allow our subjects to just express themselves in a space as who they are, it creates a whole different aura and energy in the room, and it allows you to tell their story as best as you can. So what I like to think about is open head, open heart. When you allow yourself to just be understanding of these people who you interact with, it allows you to just have more empathy, like we were saying before, and maybe have the people who you're sharing their stories with, maybe they will be more empathetic and loving to other people in their community who are sharing the same struggles as the people whose stories we are sharing. So to conclude, I want to thank you guys so much for being with me today and, sitting in a room with such profound people. I really have hope for the journalism world and for talking about issues such as this one. I think, our society is in better hands with you guys sharing all these people's stories and you just being journalists. So thank you guys so much. And thank you guys for listening to the Alligator podcast. Make sure to keep your notifications on for Spotify for when new podcasts like this one come out. And I'll see you next week. Bye.